deposits loans increased a great deal in the market when because the banks had a lot of money and they needed to loan the money. They began to do this with low interest rates for the purchase of shares, the so-called margin transactions. That is, a person would go to the bank and they say, I've got a lot of money. Now, look, investor, the shares are rising a great deal. I'll loan you $50,000 for you to buy shares so that in 6 months' time you will have $100,000, $200,000, $300,000. This is what happened. The banks loaned money so that the investors could buy shares and gave the banks as a warranty the shares themselves. This happened. The shares rose for a while until they found that they were valuing without any ballast. Ladies and gentlemen, what are shares? How can we value a share? We have to get the assets, consider the intangibles, the value of the customers or the brand. We find this value and divide by the number of shares. This is the fair value of the shares. If the value is too much above this, it's inflated. It's a share which has a value which is much higher than that to which it truly corresponds. This happened. The shares got to the peak and then began to drop. So people who had made loans from the bank, they took $50,000 thinking they would make $300,000. They bought shares. They gave the shares as warranty or guarantee for the banks. Instead of rising to 300, fell to 10. And then this brought a drastic consequence. If I have today 10 and have a debt with a bank of 50, I'm going to give my shares to the bank as payment, but 40 is still missing. Now, we can't forget that the money which was loaned for the purchase of shares was received to the bank through a deposit. That is, if the bank doesn't receive the 50, it can find it difficult to pay back to the current account person the $50,000 they received as a deposit. This happened. The non-payment of the borrowers meant that many banks broke one after the other, and because they were unable to pay the money back to the current account owners. And I can say, wow, this was an experience and it would never happen again. Well, it did happen in a different sector. In fact, it happened several times. But in 2007, we found precisely the same thing. In 2000, 2007, there was a great number of representative money available. Again, a great amount of money. The financial institutions began to loan great amounts with very low interest rates for the purchase of real estate called subprime loans, and for the purchase of very expensive real estate. We're not seeing something similar. If we're going to find apartments being sold for exorbitant prices, millions of reals. Could it be that bit of land, but with the cost of construction plus a remuneration of the builder, is R$1 million per apartment? If we have a cost of 500,000, an apartment sold at 2 million, that means that this price is inflated by $1.5 million. Now, see, this happened in Europe, it happened in the United States. People went to the banks, took money from their account, took $1 million to buy a given piece of real estate, thinking that this was going to value and that the bank should loan the money to them with very low interest rates. But it was inflated. And these which were given in guarantee of payment for the loan weren't worth that anymore, so they had to pay $1 million to the bank, but the apartment is worth $250,000. Of course, they didn't pay the banks, of course not, and consequently, the banks had difficulty in receiving the payment, and the money wouldn't come in. The $1 million was loaned. They received back $250,000, the value of the apartment, so the banks didn't manage to give the money back to the current account owners. The Brazilians are having a real party because they're buying these, because before it was worth $1 million and it was in fact worth 500,000. Today the Brazilians are going there having a great party because they're buying everything at 250,000 because the banks have to sell them. They can't be left with the banks, with the apartments in their portfolios. New break of the financial agencies and in series, because in the financial market there is that which we know as a systemic risk. There is again the situation of scriptural or bank money. If it doesn't pay the bank that what it received, then BC cannot pay back at 3. If 3 doesn't receive, he can't pay the loan to BB, and so BB doesn't pay back to 2 the money. And if 2 doesn't receive, he doesn't pay the loan to BA, and BA doesn't give back to the current account the financial initial operation, which was X. We have basically the monetary aspect. There are 2 economic schools that are set up. The first is the school of Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, who guided the world economy for a very long time. On the other hand, we have the second school, which is Austrian of economics, led by Ludwig von Mises, founded by Ludwig von Mises a long time ago. Given this situation of crisis, which was found, Keynes then suggested the injection of money, including the state putting in public resources, because this injection of money would increase the demand, a lot of money, a great demand, an amount of demand, prices rise again, and with this, the production increases to meet this demand, and the economy begins to move again. Now, this teaching was followed one way or another, both in the crisis of 1929 and in 2007. In the 1929, there was an attempt to inject money into the market so that the shares called blue chips had their value artificially raised. It didn't work. The crisis, the effects were felt for many years. And 2007, there was the same thing. The injection of money, especially public money, in the purchase of participation, partial or full, in companies with financial difficulties. In fact, here in Brazil, our president of the republic at the time said that we wouldn't face a significant crisis because we were facing a simple little wave. In spite of this, the National Congress, Brazil, approved a law that authorized banks with the participation of the state, the Bank of Brazil, Caixa Econômica, to purchase participation in financial institutions because of the crisis, but whether or not they were in a difficult situation. And this was used. The Bank of Brazil bought participation in the Votorantim Bank. Caixa Econômica bought a participation in the solid and balanced. Now, because of the crisis of 2007 in the United States, Europe, and also in Brazil, which didn't face the same size problem, we had authorization to inject public money for the acquisition of companies, which theoretically would have difficulty. In Brazil, it was used for the purchase of participation in banks, which were not, in fact, in difficulty at the time. The position of the Austrian school is a little different. They believe that crises cannot be fought with in an effective way, but prevented through a few measures. For example, a constant austere attitude by the state and private parties, avoiding unnecessary spending or avoiding what during the period of boom, burbuja as in Spain, or bubble as it's called in Brazil. In this way, another measure that should be taken besides the economy, austerity by state and private parties, constantly always should not be guided by temporary positions of the market. We should minimize the amount of representative money and increase of currency